Welcome to The Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge. We're applying the mind of Christ to the matters of the day so that you can connect the eternal with the everyday and get ready to head out into the world that God so loves in ways that honor Jesus. So let's get started. This is The Reconnect.
Your daily encouragement that God has the world in the hollow of his hand.
This is The Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge on Faith Radio.
If we're gonna fly, we fly like eagles, arms out wide. If we're gonna fear, we fear no evil. We will rise. By your power we will go. By your spirit we are bold. If we're gonna stand, we stand as giants. If we're gonna walk, we walk as lions.
Hello, my friend. Today is the 16th of June. 2026. I'm Carmen LaBerge. You're listening to The Reconnect. We're going to bring the mind of Christ to bear on a number of things happening in the headline news, and I'm going to start with this. This is breaking news. I'm going to read it off of Fox News Digital because it's the most up to date that I can find. This is literally scrolling across the chyrons on every news outlet right now. According to a post by the director of the FBI, posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, the FBI foiled a plot to attack the White House UFC event. You will remember the big cage fight that we talked about yesterday. Multiple individuals now in custody. Here are the 3 points in brief that I've been able to call in the last few minutes. 5 people are in custody. Investigators are identifying 23 individuals, or investigating 23 individuals who are identified as a part of this potential network of plotters. The alleged plan involved explosive-laden drones targeting the event itself and surrounding buildings, and then a pre-staged sniper team that would then target people who were fleeing the scene during what would be a mass evacuation. Investigators uncovered signal chats with at least 23 users discussing, quote, pre-operational activity. So this is going to be a story I am sure that folks are going to be talking about today and have great interest in. So that's what I know right now. Here's what we as Christians can say about these things. We know we live with our feet in two realities. Like, one is the absolute utter security of the kingdom of heaven, and the other is the very tenuous reality of this world. And whatever sense of security we have, it's always limited. And maybe you don't think about that very often, and that's okay. You don't want to have your body surging with cortisol all the time because you're living in such hypervigilance. And I don't want you living in fear, but I do want you living in awareness. And it's not just you and I as Christians who are, around whom the enemy is constantly prowling, looking for a way in. The enemy's looking for a way into our churches. The enemy's looking for a way into our schools. It's looking for a way into our marriages. The enemy's looking for a way into, our societal structures and our big events. And so let's be aware of that. Let's be people who, when we see something, we say something to law enforcement, but let's also be people who, when we see something, we pray something. On the positive side, when you see something, when you see a rainbow, pray in thanksgiving to God. When you see an act of kindness from one person to another, pray a prayer of thanksgiving to God. Tell God you saw that. Hey, God, I saw that. I caught that person doing good. I know you saw them too. I just want to lift it up. Just want to say I saw that. I saw what you did there, God. I see you getting your glory. Like, just spend time today taking note, being maybe hyper aware of those things. And yes, let us also be vigilant, because we do live in a day and a time and a culture, in a reality where we have things that others want, and there are destructive influences that would very much like to tear us down in every way. All right, a couple of other headlines here. Vice President J.D. Vance has a new book that hits the market today. It's called Communion. I lift this up because it's not technically a political book. It's a book about his faith. So J.D. Vance is putting his Catholic faith front and center. And while, political commentators have noted, oh, this is really good political timing because they think Catholicism is experiencing some kind of resurgence in the United States. And for the first time, there's an American pope. And so they're like, oh, because J.D. Vance is a Catholic, he's like, quote unquote, capitalizing on this timing. I'm just going to take J.D. Vance at his word here. Here's what he says about why he wrote this book. Quote, I'm a Christian, and I became a Christian because I believe in Jesus Christ's teachings. I believe they're true. I didn't always think that. And so by sharing my journey, I'm thinking that I might be helpful to others, Catholics, Protestants, people who are seeking reconciliation with God. So I'm going to take the vice president at his word here. And I'm going to get a copy probably myself, right? And I'm going to recognize that, this individual, this person has a journey of faith. You do too. And so what would your journey of faith, what would your book be titled? His is entitled Communion, Finding My Way Back to Faith. What would your, if you're going to write a memoir, what would it be titled? How would it tell the story of your reconciliation with God? How would you push God to the forefront of your story? That's what it feels like is happening here. All right, one more quick headline before the good doctor, Brick Lantz, joins us for a little bit of a checkup. I found this interesting yesterday as well. So the FDA recently approved a cellular rejuvenation therapy called ER100 for human clinical trials. Now, right now, the goal is to reverse age-related sight loss. So this is something that is being applied right now, specifically to the eye. But they are exploring applications for a variety of ways that the body degenerates because of age. I don't know about you, but my skin is getting thin and slack. Okay, there you go. That maybe Life Biosciences has an application for that. They are developing applications for this technology, hoping to tackle a host of, quote, age-related diseases. So I'm sure they're more serious than, my slacky skin, but you get the point. So here's what they're saying about themselves. They're saying that aging is driven in large part by the loss of epigenetic information, that your genes actually forget what they're supposed to be doing. And they say that's not irreversible. So their clinical study is testing whether or not restoring the information to the gene, like teaching the gene again what it's there to do, could then ameliorate these age-related diseases. So I heard a guy named Brian Johnson quoting the futurist Ray Kurzweil in relationship to this. So this is a quote that you've probably heard before if you've paid any attention to sort of the people who say that we can move beyond human death to something else, that there can be some transhumanist reality. So here's the quote. We're fast approaching the point where we could be the first generation to achieve longevity escape velocity, where science extends your life faster than you age, meaning this could be the first generation that doesn't have to die from old age. So the opportunity here for us as Christians to in terms of pressing ourselves into the conversation is to point all the way back to the beginning of everything, right? To Genesis, not just chapter 1, but chapter 2. And to talk about how death enters the world, what death is, why death comes. And certainly in the Old Testament, there are people who lived hundreds of years. And so God certainly designed the human body to live a lot longer than most of us live now. So the fact that there would be some way of increasing longevity, that does not surprise me. But this idea that we could actually keep people from ever dying, that's not biblical. And so I think that as Christians, we need to recognize that, press ourselves into that conversation. All right, Dr. Brick Lantz is joining us from the Christian Medical and Dental Association. we're going to talk about some other healthcare headlines. You're listening to The Reconnect. Our friend Dr. Brick Lantz is here with us today from the Christian Medical and Dental Association. Hello, my good doctor.
Carmen, it's so good to talk with you this morning. Hey, I want to wrap up your loose ends real quick. You talked about the enemy, you talked about our vice president, you talked about death. All right, and we do need to understand who our enemy is. It is not the government, and it is not death. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, "Oh, death, where is those stings?" For the government, which we're going to talk about because of the issues we're going to talk about, the government's important. Romans 13, that every person should be subject to governing authorities, for they're appointed by God and established by God. And in 1 Timothy chapter 2, we're to pray for those that lead us in authority, that we can have tranquil and quiet lives in godliness and dignity. So we're going to talk about those issues. Carmen, good morning to you.
Hey, good morning. I love the connecting points. I'm always trying to connect the dots, and so I appreciate your willingness to jump in and do that. We do have some headline stories related to health and the way the government is involved in our health. And so let's start with the Cleveland Clinic ending youth transgender procedures. This is not the first hospital or hospital network in the country to do so, but it is significant. What's going on here?
Yeah, so the Texas Children's Hospital down in Houston, Texas, they again had stopped doing the, and I put in air quotes, gender affirming care for minors. It's not. What we now call it, which the government is calling, is sex rejecting procedures. So that includes hormone surgical procedures, counseling, stopping those completely. And then those that have been deceived, you talk about deceit about the enemy, those that have been deceived is to help them detransition and live according to their biological, God-given, God-ordained lives. And so we're trying to create a network of healthcare professionals around the country to help these individuals. And they're in the hundreds, if not thousands, of folks that want to now live by their biological sex. And interestingly, many are coming to know Christ through this effort. But again, Cleveland Clinic, same situation, one of the most renowned hospitals and clinics in the world, has now agreed to stop doing this in minors and now allow those that have been changed permanently in some sense, but at least to live and do their best to live according to their biological sex. This is a big win. And I think the rest of the world's going to fall behind this, myself.
Yeah, I'm wondering if in the same way that like sex rejecting procedures, like we are claiming some language that is honest, I'm wondering if there's going to be language that emerges to replace like detransitioning, to replace it with something restorative, to replace that language with something redemptive, like redeeming the self, because I think that's what's happening. Yeah,
Carmen, I could not agree more. And language is so important, particularly in all of politics and medicine and everyday life. So I like your idea, and let's see what the world's going to come up with. But it is restoring what was broken by us in the medical field.
Yeah, redeeming the self in all of its parts, restoring. Yeah, I mean, I think those are such good language. Okay, Health and Human Services has moved to protect frozen embryos from destruction. So we have to like back up a step and have a conversation about how these embryos come to be and why they are stored for so long, and then also who has the right over those lives. So can you just like, how do we end up in a conversation about the government, having to move to do something? So what's going on here?
Well, again, government regulations are important. They're important for our health. They're important for medicine, and they're important for policymaking and decisions we make within those fields. So again, give thanks that the government has made this statement. And the quote is that frozen embryos are, quote, human children deserving to be born to a loving family, period, end quote. That's from our federal government, Department of HHS. So we're in this situation because we have probably millions, unfortunately been very poorly regulated. And the federal government's leaving up to states to regulate their own IVF, in vitro fertilization, which is one aspect of assisted reproductive technology. But again, fertility clinics do freeze these embryos from an infertile couple, if you will. But of course, it expands beyond infertile couples, and we could go down that road if you want. But they're frozen. So, in fact, just a couple years ago, the baby that was frozen the longest was 30 years, is now 2 years old and doing well. So, adopted by a woman and gave birth to that frozen embryo. But the fact that we're now putting language into the sphere of IVF and the frozen embryos, I think is a huge win. It's a gain. And hopefully it will help policymakers, our legislatures, those in medicine in this field, will start using the appropriate language there and respect human life, respect the Imago Dei.
So when we think about in vitro fertilization, or when we think about reproductive technologies to assist people who are otherwise unable to conceive and have a child, that is a conversation that many, many times the Christian community is actually left out of. When a couple is going through this process, it often only includes their doctor or series of doctors. And so here, I just want you to make a pitch for and an appeal for CMDA, the Christian Medical and Dental Association. So if there are people in any part of the healthcare world listening right now, could you just invite them in to CMDA?
Yeah, so Carmen, I appreciate that. And it's not just CMDA by any means. And I am the Vice President of Advocacy and Bioethics at CMDA. But we partner with a lot of other organizations, locally, state, national, a consortium of organizations to appeal for what's good and what's right and what's true. And the federal government is listening, which I find honorable and respectable, to us and to others about many issues, including IVF. So at least they have a listening ear. You know, CMDA, my department, I meet with the HHS on an occasional basis throughout the year to discuss these topics. So they're very responsive to our ideas from a Christian healthcare perspective. There's those in that department that want to do what's right and what's good. But again, there's other organizations that reach out as well. So let's praise all those organizations, leaders that are advocating for a biblical perspective on life and how that affects our government regulations and how it affects we practice medicine, including the field of IVF. So advocacy, I think, is a God-given work. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and so if you want to get involved, you want to see what they're up to, again, we're privileged to have with us CMDA's Senior Vice President for Advocacy and Bioethics, Dr. Brick Lantz, and he is here with us today. We survey some of the headline news with him. And when we come back from a very brief break, we're going to have him tell us about the FDA's approval of a new sunscreen, which, as a person who just had biopsies yesterday at the dermatologist, I'm definitely interested in. You're listening to The Reconnect. Just take the first step. Just take the first step. I mean, every journey begins with a first step, right? And if you want to hike to the top of a mountain, or if you just want to, make it around the block, it all starts with a first step. Just take one step, a step out the door. Now, the same holds true in the journey of discipleship with Jesus. A relationship with Jesus actually begins with a first step. Sometimes taking that first step can be really hard, right? Well, if you've got questions about what it means to begin a relationship with Jesus, just take the first step. Text the word faith to 41224. Our friends at the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association are going to hold your hand as you take the first step or the next step in your walk of faith with Jesus. They're going to help you walk with him and talk with him. Take the first step of faith today. Text the word faith to 41224. All right, sunscreen. We all know that we're supposed to be putting sunscreen on every single day. Most of us, when we were kids, didn't do that. Some of us are suffering the long-term effects of that. Our friend Dr. Brick Lantz is here with us, and we're going to talk a little bit about something that the FDA has approved. What's going on here? Apparently the FDA, for the first time in like 25 years, thinks there's a good new sunscreen ingredient.
Well, yes, bimotrizonol, if I say that correctly. It's been used in
I
Europe
didn't
for
try.
approximately, yeah, for approximately 20 years. The brand name, if people want to know, is Parsol Shield. So that's the brand name. And we do need to talk about blocking ultraviolet A and B sun rays. So again, the B is what causes the burns, and that's important to avoid the burn. But the A is probably what causes the cancer, variety of skin cancers. So this is a new substance. It's been tested extensively, so hopefully it will hit the market, and I think it's going to sell very well in the United States. That's not to take away other good common sense. Again, for any topical treatment, wait until the child's 6 years old. If they're 6 months old, if they're under 6 months old, then of course you protect them. All right. But let's not forget the hats, the sunglasses, limit your exposures and avoid the things that are risky, the tanning booths and these oils that actually are not helpful. So there's certain things to avoid. But I think I think it's going to hit the market very well in the United States. Now, if someone's at high risk, I know it doesn't look the prettiest, but you think of the zinc oxide, the mineral sunscreens to cover your ears and your nose and your scalp or whatever, your neck, whatever you need to. Very, very effective. So those types of minerals. But there are a variety of chemicals that are used in our sunscreens. I think this one is a very safe one, and I think it's going to change the market myself.
Fascinating. I remember zinc oxide, and then I remember Noxzema when you didn't use the zinc oxide. Like, right? There's all kinds of things there. Um, do you have any update? We've got a person on the text line just asking for an update on the Ebola outbreak. Are you keeping an eye on that at all?
I am. So Peter Stafford is back with his family, the one missionary doctor that
Mm.
was placed in the hospital in Germany. He is now doing well. He's almost fully recovered from Ebola. None of his family, who are obviously immediate contact, his wife and children, did not get it. They're again using governments over there restricting travel and transport, and so it's slightly under control, if I can say that. So there's been over 100 cases. I don't know, and again, this particular strain, Ebola strains vary. There's been over 50% deaths
Mm.
from it, but seems to be controlled at this time.
All right, we've got one more topic of conversation here. Mosquitoes. What's the latest on mosquitoes, and what do I need to learn about what they're learning?
Yeah, so this is interesting. We read this article about DEET, diethyl metatoluamide, and it's a theory that the insects may associate that chemical with a feeding. So, in other words, they're now after training the mosquito, they'll go to that. Uh, they'll even go bypass the DEET, even though we put it on our body. Of course, this varies significantly where you live in the world. Minnesota versus Oregon. Minnesota, the mosquitoes are, well, they're the state bird, I think.
They're like, yeah.
Um, but this is in the Journal of Experimental Biology. And then there's a question, do mosquitoes mutate? Here, I'm going to give you my analogy, Carmen, what I think is happening, because this is all just theory of why mosquitoes will still bite even if DEET is present. So I have a golden retriever, an electric fence. He has an electric collar. My neighbor has a beagle, electric fence, and electric collar. They would yap at each other because they wanted to play. They wanted to play so bad together. And they would sit there and yap because they didn't want to get shocked. Eventually, their drive overwhelmed them, and the little beagle would jump through the fence and yelp because he gets shocked, and then they play. I think the mosquito's doing the same thing. You know, this bite, this blood is so worth it. I'm going to get through this DEET. Anyway, that's my little theory. Again, more
So the
research is
DEET,
needed.
so the DEET doesn't kill them.
It doesn't kill them. It's to prevent them from
Hmm.
biting. Yeah, it's to prevent them from
Oh.
biting. And then,
Mm.
Carmen, if there's any chance, we should talk about the screw room real
Oh,
briefly.
sure.
This is what I just want to say, blessings to the government, the USDA, the CDC is doing the right thing. It's in the news. I think there's a website at USDA. People can actually follow it. They have a map and they have the numbers. And I think it's at 12 or 13 right now. Usually in cattle, I think there's been a dog in New Mexico right at the border that's gotten this disease. But the screwworm, it's called that because this is a fly. Its larva looks like a screw, so that's where it's got its title. Um, but they're restricting movement of livestock and animals within those areas and monitoring very closely. So if a animal gets an open wound, the fly lands. Now, these have not been in the United States for decades. They're from either Mexico or South America. But again, I think this is under good control. There's education of all the veterinarians, all the cattle ranchers. This is where the benefit, we now live in the age of information. We've had different ages in the past. This is the age of information where the spread of information is actually very, very useful and rapid, so we can monitor it. But fortunately, they keep it under control. This is where you want to pray for your government to make the right regulations. It's interesting. One of the ways they're trying to get rid of it is creating sterile flies. So they will then mate with the other flies that had to have the screwworm disease. And it's not a disease. What they do is they make the wound so infected that the animal dies from infection, not from the actual screwworm itself. But yeah, having that sterile flies populate the territory is very, very interesting. So again, government, research, the field of medicine, the field of veterinarian, let's all work together for these things that, again, you talked a little bit earlier about technology, Carmen. Let's use technology to fix what's broken. Let's not use technology to enhance what is normal. That's kind of the basis for us as human beings. We're all going to die. We're not going to prevent it. But if someone has something that's broken, like a broken leg, we have the technology. Let's fix what's not normal.
That is so good and so helpful, and I'm so glad that you brought up the screwworm infestation. And so, if you're listening right now and you've missed out on that, it is currently affecting Texas from basically southeast of Odessa all the way down to pretty much just south of San Antonio, west of Corpus Christi. So it's a big part of Texas where there are cases. And so we do want to be praying for God to come alongside and help those who are seeking to bring this under control, because our food supply, like this is a food supply conversation as well, and the welfare of ranchers and people. And so, as always, Brick, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for walking with us. Thank you for the work that you're doing at CMDA in terms of advocacy on a national scale. We just really appreciate it.
Hey, Carmen, if people do want to follow some of our work, not all of it, but some of it, you can just go to advocacy@cmda.org. Advocacy@cmda.org.
Great. We'll send you that link on the text line if you're listening. You want to check it out. Advocacy@cmda.org. All right. Next up, we are going to talk with our friend Rick Lawrence from Vibrant Faith, and we're going to talk about the times and ways in which you've been disappointed with Jesus or with God. What do you do with that? What do you do in your relationship with Jesus when you're disappointed? That's up next here on The Reconnect. What do you do with your disappointment with Jesus? And what does Jesus do with our disappointment with him? We're going to do a little workshopping with our friend Rick Lawrence from Vibrant Faith. He's working on a book on the shocking kindness of Jesus, and his working title is Snakes and Stones. And so today we're going to talk about the kindness of Jesus in the midst of our disappointments. Rick, welcome back to The Reconnect.
Thanks, Carmen.
So where does this grow out of? Give us you got to give us the starting point for the workshop.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So Snakes and Stones, that title is referencing a tiny little parable that Jesus told that I don't think we often hear in church. It's he's basically saying to his disciples and the others that are gathered around them, you know how a good father acts. You know, if if you ask a good father for a loaf of bread, they're not going to give you a stone. If you ask for a fish, that father's not going to give you a snake. I mean, they have a basic level of kindness, is what he's trying to say. And why does Jesus have to say this? Because the trust in his kindness is under scrutiny. That we experience disappointments in life, and when we do, it's inevitable that we think, Jesus, why didn't this thing that's so important to me happen? Do you just not care, or are you even real? And the genesis of the book was just a story of a woman who was in one of my wife's Bible studies, and each woman was supposed to share a little part of her story each week. And this woman, in sharing her story, told that little parable of Jesus, and then closed her Bible and said, Jesus has only ever given me snakes and stones in my life. And there's just this pall of silence that came over the room. So that was the genesis of it, is just exploring, the very real feeling that we have when we're deeply disappointed by Jesus, and how do we make sense of that?
So let's step into that. Where do you want to begin the conversation in terms of how we process through this question of disappointment? You want to start with Judas?
Yeah, let's do. So we think of Judas as this kind of cartoon villain in the gospel story. We think of him as the inevitable character in the story that is the betrayer. Because we think of him in a cartoon way, we don't push past that to try to understand what was really motivating him, and how can I relate to what was motivating him. So there's this great story I love to tell about Leonardo da Vinci, who was painting The Last Supper, his masterwork, and he had a huge disagreement with a fellow painter as he was painting The Last Supper. And he was so angry at this fellow painter, he decided to get his revenge by painting the face of that guy as Judas in his Last Supper painting. And when people would come over, he'd point out that this guy is the face of Judas in my painting. And then he got to the point where he was ready to paint the face of Jesus, and he got stuck. He couldn't do it. Something wasn't working. He didn't know what to do. And it dawned on him that the hatred he was harboring for his fellow painter was keeping him from finishing the painting. And it's just a great illustration of what we think of as Judas. If you think of how would I like to portray the person I hate the most? Well, I'll put him as Judas, because that is the quintessential character that we hate, this cartoon guy. But if you think a little bit about how did Judas get to this point? He was one of Jesus's closest friends in this intimate community of disciples for 3 years. He was walking and sleeping and eating and laughing and crying with Jesus and all his closest friends, and he saw these amazing miracles, the most amazing things people had ever seen in history, and he also saw Jesus' heart. So how is it possible that this person who is as close to Jesus as anyone could turn in this way? And I think the answer is his deep disappointment. So Judas joined up because he thought Jesus was the Messiah, but he was going to be a kind of Messiah that would overthrow the Roman oppressors and rescue the Jewish people from their captivity. And he thought this would be a political / military campaign that Jesus was going to lead. And he saw in Jesus that he could very well do that he could do it, but then he didn't do it. And he didn't do it again, and he didn't do it again, and he didn't do it again. And by the time it got to the 3 years in, Judas was convinced that he'd been played by Jesus, that his deep disappointment about what he expected about Jesus became sort of weaponized. And I think that's what fueled his betrayal. And so what's interesting about this is to think about, well, how does Jesus respond to all of this? How does Jesus respond to someone who is so disappointed that he would betray him to death. I think that's what's fascinating when we think about our own lives, because if we're honest, some of our disappointments get weaponized too. They go so deep, they're so raw, and they're so confusing to us that they affect the way we see Jesus, and they expose the kind of relationship we thought we had with Jesus.
I think our expectations is part of what you're plumbing the depths of here. What
Yes.
were Judas's expectations of a Messiah? And then when Jesus didn't measure up to that, when Jesus was a different kind of savior than Judas thought he wanted, that's when Judas reaches this. Jesus doesn't change, but Judas does reach this point where he no longer puts his faith in Jesus as Messiah, because Jesus is a different kind of Messiah than Judas was hoping for. And
Yeah.
so we have seen, I know in my life, I have seen people become disappointed in God in such a way, in such a at such a profound depth. God did not do for them or allowed something to happen to them that in their view was just unacceptable. And they then turned from Jesus. Jesus never turns from Judas. Judas turns from him.
Yeah, that's so good, Carmen. And I think you nailed it when you said the word expectations. So our disappointments are always tied to our expectations, not just with Jesus, but with other people. When other
Mm-hmm.
people let us down, what they're letting down is our expectations of how they would be with us. So that's why this is so important, to know so deeply the heart of Jesus. This is why for the last 20 years, this has been the focus of all my work, both my training work and speaking, writing, all of it has been oriented around inviting people to get a deeper taste of the heart of Jesus. Because when we are disappointed in someone, for instance, what carries us through that disappointment is our experience of that person's heart.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't understand Jesus' heart or have a surface understanding of it, then we're headed for a deep disappointment. I just watched the last episode of a show that my wife and I have been watching for a while. It's a Canadian sitcom called Kim's Convenience.
Mm.
And the church is a big part of this show, surprisingly so. And one of the main characters in the show is a Korean mom who's the prayer leader for her women's group at the church. But she gets MS, and she's secretly really angry at Jesus for it. And in this last episode, when she prays now as the prayer leader for her women's group, the opposite of what she's praying for keeps happening in people's lives, and she kind of translate that as now Jesus is rejecting her because she was so deeply disappointed in him. He's rejecting her. And there's a great scene in this show when they're in the father and the mother in bed, and she's so stressed about this, and the father says, "Well, I don't know much about Jesus. You do, but I do know one thing: he doesn't push people away. He draws them to themselves." And I thought that was a profound moment of truth, that in our disappointment with him and in Judas's disappointment with Jesus, he doesn't reject him. Judas is one of those who's at the Last Supper who gets his feet washed, and he's eating with Jesus when Jesus is well aware that Judas's disappointment has reached such a level that he's about to betray him. So Jesus continues to open himself, invite Judas's presence. Like the father said in that show, he doesn't push away, he draws near.
When we come back, I want to propose to you maybe using the Apostle Paul as an example or a testimony of one who had expectations of a Messiah and then had a transforming encounter with Jesus, is radically reoriented, but lives the rest of his life with what we know is a thorn that he continually pleads with the Lord to remove, but God leaves it right there. So can we juxtapose Judas's experience with Paul's experience as a part of this conversation?
Love that.
Since we're workshopping.
Yes.
All right. We're talking with our friend Rick Lawrence. He's working on a book. And so, you know me, I've pressed myself into the process. And so we're workshopping The Shocking Kindness of Jesus, Snakes and Stones. And today we're talking about disappointment. And so if you've got some input on this, you want to participate in the workshop, text line's open, 877-933-2484. You're listening to The Reconnect.
Psst, have you heard the news? Listening just got better with the new and improved Faith Radio app. No more restrictions, no more static, no more missing your favorite shows. Now, listen when you want, where you want, and share with everyone. When you need hope, encouragement, Jesus, it's right there on your phone. Text the word app to 877-933-2484 and follow the link or search Faith Radio Network in your app store.
Think for a moment or consider for a moment ways in which you've been, well, if you're honest, disappointed with God, disappointed with Jesus. We're talking with Rick Lawrence from Vibrant Faith, author of Editing Jesus and a number of other very helpful books. And we're talking about the shocking kindness of Jesus in the midst of our disappointments. So, Rick, this is obviously not fully thought out, but I'm wondering if Paul, the Apostle Paul, might be used as an example or a testimony here. So I'm thinking about, 2 Corinthians 12, where Paul describes pleading with the Lord 3 times to remove some persistent, painful thorn in the flesh. But God chooses not to remove that affliction. Instead, telling Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. And so God promises that, his grace is going to be enough to sustain Paul. And then Paul accepts that answer, stating, that he's going to boast all the more gladly about his weakness so that Christ's power can rest upon him and others can come to know Christ. So I don't know if that's useful in this conversation, but it's what came to mind.
Yeah, I love that comparison though, Carmen. And Paul's story is perfect. So he's all in. He was all in before he was knocked off his knocked to the dust and blinded. He was all in against the people of God. Then once he recovers from that and comes to know Jesus, he's all in for Jesus. And then he has this, as you mentioned, this thing he calls a thorn, and it's so terrible he calls it something sent from Satan that he just doesn't understand why it can't be taken away. And his disappointment in it not being taken away kind of grips him. And that's when Jesus responds to him, my grace is enough, I'm not going to take it away. So that's a perfect thing to kind of dive into here, because what is actually happening in that encounter when Jesus says, my grace is enough, my power is perfected in weakness? I think he's saying 2 things. One, my presence matters more than everything else right now. So the thing that you wished could happen that isn't happening can be overshadowed if you have a deeper taste of my presence. Not that it will go away or it will be diminished, but it will be overshadowed by the experience you have of my heart in this situation. Your thing can diminish in importance, not go away, but diminish in its importance. And the other thing is that the whole power perfected in weakness. What is he's saying that when you are in a place of weakness and you attach to me, remain in me, you get what I have. You get resources you don't have when you are dependent on me. And this message Jesus delivers over and over and over again through the Gospels, that really the point of our life is to come to a place of deep, intimate, relaxed, everyday dependence on him. That dependence looks like attaching and remaining in him. It's getting close to his heart, which is what I mentioned before. So I think the real sort of focal point for our whole life is this day, in what way am I tasting the heart of Jesus in a little bit of a deeper way than I did yesterday? Either through studying his heart and understanding what drives his heart, what he loves and doesn't love, what he's passionate about, why he does the things he does with people. That's trying to understand his heart, but also understanding his heart in our everyday experiences. What is the presence of Jesus? What does it mean to us in our everyday experiences? And how are we experiencing his heart when we go through great disappointment? I think what we know is true is that he is not repulsed by our anger or our frustrations or our disappointments with him. He's still inviting us to come near to him. He's not punishing us or offended by it. And he also, I think, he emotes with us. So it sounds like pandering, but actually, Jesus, we know from Scripture, he grieves when we grieve. He knows we're disappointed in him, and he knows why. And he's not standing there saying, look at your petty disappointment with me. He's actually entering into what we're feeling. And he feels what we feel. He takes it on himself. He carries it. What do we most need when we're in that place of disappointment? We need someone to sit with us on the floor while we're sobbing, to put their arm around us and let us know, I'm here. I haven't gone anywhere. I'm not as far away as you think I am. In fact, I'm right here and my arms around you. I want to feel what you're feeling right now. And I'll still be here when the waves of disappointment recede. I'll still be here loving you, showing you my good heart, and taking your disappointment and making it into something great. I love what Paul said. To sum up his life, he said, I consider everything garbage compared to knowing Jesus. That's the same guy who begged for his thorn to be taken away, and it wasn't. How could he say that? It's because he leaned into the presence of Jesus. And then that presence of Jesus, his overarching heart, just overshadowed everything in his life.
Rick, we got to leave it right there. But folks have really been blessed by particularly like this, just hearing you just reflect. And so thank you for just doing that so freely with us today. Want to invite you, if you're listening right now, to connect with Rick Lawrence. You can do that at vibrantfaith.org. Vibrant faith in Jesus is something that's lived out in community, and it really does transform everything. And so we'd love for you to be paying ridiculous attention to Jesus today and have a Jesus-centered daily walk with him. Those are just some of the titles that you'll find by Rick Lawrence. Rick, thank you so much, as always, for being with us.
Thank you, Carmen. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, likewise. All right, friends, thank you for all your texts on the text line today. You can keep those coming, 877-933-2484. The world needs the love and the light of Christ today. And Jesus is sending you out there to be just that. So go out there and be shiny, and go with the blessing of God. Because people don't need another piece of our mind. They need the peace of the mind of Christ. So let's receive God's blessing in order that we're prepared to give it to them. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you his peace. Have a great day. Thanks for listening to The Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge. Let us know how we can help you more fully reconnect the eternal with the everyday. We want to walk with you throughout your journey of discipleship. So let's connect. You can text us at 877-933-2484 or connect with us online at myfaithradio.com and on all our social media. I look forward to connecting with you as we each seek to reconnect the eternal with the everyday.